some 3 days after the original one was proposed, is an improvement. Credit should be given to both sides for many of the things that I just mentioned, because Democrats and Republicans had to agree for this to make the final package. But we believe what we'll vote on this afternoon, and I believe we'll enjoy strong bipartisan support on the floor of the Senate, is a dramatic improvement in the last 72 hours. Credit to both sides. We believe some of these ideas were essential, and that's why we voted as we did on the floor. But to reach this agreement and bring it forward, it took both sides. I want to salute my colleagues, starting with, of course, the Democratic leader, Senator Schumer. He's put in some hours. I can't tell you how many times I've stepped into his office and Michelle, his assistant, has told me he's in with Secretary Minuchin. They spent days together, going till midnight and starting fresh early in the morning, trying to reach an agreement, which I believe we've finally done. Finally. There are just a few little items left, but I don't think they'll hold us up. So to Senator Schumer, his staff, and to all my colleagues, ranking members, who pitched in their committees of jurisdiction to try to come up with good ideas and to sell them in a bipartisan agreement, there was an exceptional amount of work. Special credit, too, to the staff, my own and the others who've come to work in this dangerous moment. We're being told to stay home, telework from home where you have to or where you can. In some cases, you can't. And those who did show up in the Capitol, including the staff that's here today on the floor, come at risk. We know that. Risk to their own health and the health of their family members and others that they love as we do. So I thank them for this. I understand that we may be gone for several weeks, and I think that is appropriate, but for a national emergency which calls us back, and we will come back if that's necessary, I think we should take some time away from one another, away from the Capitol, to really mind to our own health and the well-being of our own families, and to work back home as best we can, teleconferencing in other ways, to let people know what we've done with this new legislation. I hope that during this period of time that I can engage my colleagues in thinking about another issue. Senator Portman, Republican of Ohio, and I have introduced legislation calling for at least an inquiry at this moment in history about remote voting or some different approach to voting that doesn't require our physical presence on the floor in times of national emergency. It just makes sense. The fact of the matter is, our meetings of the Senate almost every single day have violated CDC guidelines that tell us not to gather in a group of 10 or more. And yet we come to the floor because we have to, because this is life or death when it comes to this legislation that we're considering, and we know what our jobs are. We can find a better way to do this in the 21st century, using the technology that is available in so many different ways to have verifiable, accurate, honest voting for those who cannot or should not physically be present on the floor. I've spoken to Elizabeth McDonough, the parliamentarian of the Senate, and her staff, and want to engage in a conversation. What we know is that this is historic, and it really is a dramatic change from what we've done in the past. But I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it reflects the reality of where we are today with a public health crisis. It may reflect the reality of tomorrow, which could be some different national emergency or, God forbid, some terrorist activity that keeps us away from this Capitol building when we still have work to do. So I want to thank Senator Portman, Senator Klobuchar, who has really been one of the leaders in this effort, Senator Schatz, who I know is a co-sponsor. We are now up to close to 20 co-sponsors on a bipartisan basis to move forward in this change in the Senate rules. I hope we can have conference calls during the time that we're physically away from the Capitol and move this idea forward. The House is considering the same thing as well. Now is the time to do it. It's time to bring this great body, the United States Senate, into the 21st century when it comes to executing our constitutional responsibility without endangering anyone, especially members and their staff and family. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Wyoming.
Well, Mr. President, for families, for healthcare workers, for small businesses, people who are waking up today all across the country asking what's next, I believe that today we can report there is good news. The resolve and determination of this Senate, working in a bipartisan way and working with the White House, have delivered a rescue plan for the American people and for our American healthcare workers. Today, we are going to pass new authorities, new resources, and new programs to deal with two crises that we as a nation are facing. One is the medical crisis, the coronavirus, and the other is the economic crisis that is a direct result of the medical crisis that we are facing. The Senate is providing an overwhelming and a massive health care and economic response package. We're doing both, and we have to do both at the same time. It's a rescue operation. The resources that our health care providers need and the resources that our economy needs. The health care resources are going to be surging for communities all around the country. Every one of the 50 states is affected. Over $100 billion for our hospitals and for the heroes who are taking care of coronavirus patients. And Mr. President, as you know, I'm a physician, practiced medicine for a long time in Wyoming. People go into medicine so that they can do a number of things. You go into medicine, and what we expect of our health care providers is to save lives, to cure the sick, and to prevent disease. For all of those men and women working in this profession, I will tell you, this will be their finest hour. We're hearing about heroes all over the country, and that's going to continue as long as this crisis is in effect. Because that's what we're asking them to do every day: save lives, heal the sick, and prevent disease. We see that with our public health officers who are out there trying to prevent disease. We see it in the communities, people trying to heal the sick and to save the lives in the hospitals day and night. And what they're asking for us are resources, and that is now going to be provided in the bill that we're going to pass today and will hopefully soon be on the President's desk. So we're also surging dollars to individuals and to families and to businesses and distressed parts of our economy. Direct money, $1,200 per individual, $500 per child. You take a look at that, and $350 billion in bridge loans and grants to small and medium-sized businesses. Unemployment insurance to make workers, we're talking about people who were working and ready to go to work the next day, but weren't able to because of the medical crisis affecting us. So workers who weren't able to work right now, to make sure that they are made whole. Now, we have held the line against so many of the ideological issues that Democrats, and specifically the Speaker of the House, tried to put into this legislation. We made it clear lives are at stake. Those are debates for another day. The crisis is upon us, and the rescue work needs to be done. I believe time was wasted. We should have passed this last Sunday. Time was wasted, and it's time that was wasted that the American people don't have and didn't have. But today we are working on this action plan. Pass the Senate bill today to stabilize American jobs, to surge health care resources to the front lines. The House cannot delay. Mr. President, the House needs to get this passed today and sent to the President of the United States for his signature today. America should not wake up tomorrow and have to watch and wait and worry to see if the House was going to pass this bill. The House needs to act today. The American people need that reassurance today. Look, families, young people, everyone, they have committed to slowing the spread for the remainder of the 15-day window, about a week more to go. People are doing it all around the country. People are going to continue to ramp up manufacturing of medical equipment, masks, ventilators, respirators, tests to save lives. People are going to keep cutting red tape and pressing on scientific and medical breakthroughs for treatment and vaccines. Going forward, and I see that the minority leader on the floor, going forward, we need to take a long, hard look at our supply chain. China has been exposed. We cannot allow ourselves ever again to be in any way dependent on China for medicines, for materials, or for minerals. Mr. President, my focus, along with what I know is the President's focus, is to bring America back, stronger than ever before. We are a strong and a resilient nation. We will get through this. Our country's healthcare infrastructure and our economic resolve is today being tested. We will defeat the virus, and we will be back stronger than ever. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I come to the floor to thank my colleagues for all their hard work on this legislation and to urge my colleagues to move forward today because the state of Washington desperately needs this help. When I think about this package that literally has been crafted since Saturday about 10 o'clock and people running to go and collaborate, and yes, there were many challenges to that collaboration, I also think about the people who are on the front line in the state of Washington who have paid such a heavy price. From the factory worker we just lost in Everett, Washington, to the COVID-19 disease, to the grocer at the Leshai grocery store who was just trying to help deliver groceries to a needed public, to the pathologist at the University of Washington who was a leader in this field but also lost his life. Real sacrifice and real crushing blows have been dealt in this disease. But today, we are responding with more help for our state. We are giving them more money for hospitals, more money for the front line with protective gear, more money for testing, and more money to support them as they continue the effort to try to stop this disease. It's so important that we give state and local governments and tribes the resources they need to be on the front lines in fighting this disease. And I thank our governor, Governor Inslee, for leading that charge every single day in trying to focus our response on this disease. Because we were the site of the first COVID-19 case, we have been at this since January 21st. And the sadness that we have all felt over the Kirkland nursing home, where we lost so many patients, we hope will be a lesson for the rest of the nation to pay attention to the seriousness of this virus. We're here today, though, to also, besides giving that frontline support to states, to cities, to counties, and to our healthcare delivery system, we're also here to say we want to try to lessen the economic impacts of a shelter-in-place or social distancing. Our businesses, small businesses, have been hit hard. Our restaurants, our other businesses who shut down, who don't have the same resources to come to Washington, D.C. and to lobby for aid and support, but are counting on us to create a program that small businesses can get both grants and loans. So the $360 billion in this program, I hope SBA will help dispatch with urgency to those businesses who have complied and have done their best to keep their employees while also shutting down their business. We also know that the unemployment benefits in this package, which will be for 4 months, will be a boost to giving people who are unemployed, and the expansion of that definition to cover those who are part of a gig economy that may not have been covered in the past, is important to give people the safety net to make it through this process. I wish we would have come to terms on even allowing for COBRA enhancements, particularly for the aerospace sector. I'll be filing a bill today to make sure that as we continue to move through this crisis, that we think about those who are going to have a shift or laid off, as we have seen in recent days in Everett, Washington, that they too could have health care beyond just 1 month of a COBRA health plan. It's so important in fighting this disease that not only we take care of unemployment benefits, but we also make sure people in unemployment have access to health care. We can't be in the midst of a pandemic and not give people affordable access to health care. I also thank my colleagues for other provisions of this package that are helping in giving individual taxpayers relief in the sense of a rebate check. Not only will individuals get a rebate check, but families a rebate check of $2,400 that should help those who have been hit hardest by this disease to help in these sustaining days in which we are sheltering in place in the state of Washington. There are so many more things that we need to do, and while I support the elements of supporting the aviation industry in this package, I wish that we would have gotten more requirements on the airline industries for the grant section of this bill. I personally believe that in the future, in a healthier airline industry, they should pay money back to the federal government. We certainly should be protecting the workforce during this time period, and that is what is most important. To make sure that an airline doesn't take money from the federal government or go into bankruptcy and shortchange the workers and the workforce, as has been done in previous packages to them. I fully support, though, the loan guarantee program and the loan guarantees that are so important and so qualified in this package to have very specific requirements to them. I also want to thank my colleagues from the Banking Committee who worked hard on provisions in this legislation to make sure there was more transparency in the process for who got access to the to the loans in this package. While we think of the processes we've been through before on TARP and the processes we've been through before on other lending, our colleagues here on this side of the aisle made sure that there were better requirements for oversight, inspector generals, accounting of the resources, and to make sure that we knew exactly where these dollars were being spent. I know Treasury will have its hands full, but because of Democrats, we will have more transparency in exactly how those dollars go out the door. So, Mr. President, I want to thank Leader Schumer and his staff for working so diligently on this package. It has been a very hectic couple of days. And I would say a special thanks to the Commerce Committee staff, to David Strickland, Melissa Porter, David Martin, Ron Ullman, who literally have been camped out for probably since last Saturday, working and perfecting the language in these sections related to aviation. As I said, there's more work to do, and we all know there's more work to do. I know that I want to continue to fight for the aviation supply chain to make sure that when we come out of this crisis after an economic downturn around the globe, that the United States is well positioned to return the supply chain workforce to building one of America's best products, airplanes, one of America's greatest, actually America's single largest export, airplanes. But to do that, we're going to have to get through this crisis and protect what we think needs to be continued health care access to those laid-off workers. So let's get these dollars to the front line, to our hospitals, to our states, for better equipment, for more supplies. Let's support them in doing what they do best, helping to fight this disease and seeing this through to the other side of America's challenge. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
Minority Leader.
And first, let me thank the senator from Washington for her hard and diligent work. No one fought harder for the state of Washington, which, like my state of New York, is in such crisis, than the two senators from Washington. And I thank Senator Cantwell for her great work up and down the line, whether it was the government, the companies, the people of Washington state. She was there. Now, Mr. President, I say to the American people, help is on the way. Big help, quick help. I say to the American people, because Democrats insisted on making this bill better, we can now call it a bill that puts workers first, not corporations, that has a Marshall Plan for hospitals, and that has accountability, transparency, and watchdogs over much of the lending that is in this bill. Now, 6 days of subtle diplomacy, and here, in these mostly now empty corridors, we've shaped a bipartisan agreement on the largest rescue package in American history, which was sealed last night a few minutes after 1 in the morning when Leader McConnell and I came to the floor to announce we had an agreement. It was not a moment of celebration, but rather one of necessity. Facing an unprecedented crisis, it was the duty of the Senate to produce bipartisan legislation to send an immediate infusion of resources to our public health systems, state and local governments, small business, and American workers. As I said from the start, Democrats had two main goals: a Marshall Plan for public health workers and hospitals on the front line, and putting workers first, not corporations. Had we not asked for the Republican Party to recognize us by not going forward on those first two votes, this bill would have been much worse. Our actions made it much better. Not everything we wanted, but much, much better. And we're proud as a caucus and united as a caucus of the job we have done to improve this legislation. Because after all, this legislation will be with us not for days and not for weeks, not even for months, but probably for years. To improve this legislation was worth taking an extra day or two, improving it, after the Republican leader just put it down without consulting us and tried to say, take it or leave it. Now, like all compromises, this bill is far from perfect, but we believe the legislation has improved sufficiently to warrant its quick consideration and passage. Because many Democrats and Republicans were willing to do the serious and hard work, the bill is much better than when we started. And starting yesterday morning, we all came together to get this bill done. We worked in a bipartisan way, as this body should have worked and should work, and here we are. Once the language is ready, Democrats are ready to speed up the consideration of the bill as much as possible. We believe that the legislation has been improved sufficiently to warrant its quick consideration and passage. I expect the Senate can get the job done in the new few hours. Now, the American people watching should know what is in this bill, which has undergone many revisions over the past 48 hours. Many of the programs and funding authorities that are being finalized as we speak will go to them directly, the American people, and could make the difference in the next few months between putting food on the table and going hungry, between surviving this period of unemployment and financial ruin. So let me briefly run through the major components of the bill. First, as I mentioned, a Marshall Plan for the American medical system is now underway. This agreement will inject $150 billion into our hospitals and health system, headlined by a new $100 billion fund to provide our health system with whatever it needs to fight back. The grants in that fund will be available to everyone who is fighting coronavirus: hospitals, nursing homes, community health centers, and all types of Medicaid providers and safety net providers. It includes funding for personal protective equipment, testing supplies, a surge in our healthcare workforce, additional Medicare funding, research into coronavirus treatments, and more. The funding will literally act as a lifeline as the number of COVID-19 cases continues to climb. So, as I said, a Marshall Plan for American medical system is now underway. Second, workers first. Millions of workers, through no fault of their own, are losing paychecks with no way to cover their daily expenses and monthly bills. Coming to their rescue is a program Democrats devised to boost unemployment insurance. We call it unemployment insurance on steroids. The agreement increases the maximum unemployment benefit by $600 per week and ensures that laid-off workers on average will receive their full pay for 4 months. These benefits will be much easier to access and will be expanded to include part-time, self-employed, freelancers, and gig economy workers. And the new program has a second. The first job of this program: get money into the pockets of people who are losing their jobs through no fault of their own, and it will come quickly and generously. But it has a second purpose. It will also allow companies to furlough workers so they can stay on as employees, so that when, God willing, this crisis abates, they can quickly resume work with their employer and businesses can reassemble. When this crisis is over, we don't want every worker who's losing their job to scatter to the winds, and so many good businesses, through no fault of their own, will fall apart. By keeping them on furlough, paying them, the businesses can reassemble quickly. This proposal, unemployment insurance on steroids, will be the greatest expansion of unemployment benefits in decades, a social safety net wide enough to catch the millions of American workers who became unemployed virtually overnight, woven with fibers strong enough to hold them through the worst of this crisis. As I said, we're going to pass unemployment insurance on steroids. Third, oversight, transparency, and accountability of all loans made to corporations. The Republican bill initially put the focus on rescuing industry and did not do enough to protect the hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of workers those industries employ. But as a result of our negotiations, Democrats have secured crucial worker protections throughout the bill as conditions to rescuing large companies, including incentives for businesses to keep workers on the payroll during the crisis. For the nearly 2 million airline employees, Democrats have also secured direct payroll payments to keep you on the job. Your collective bargaining rights will be protected, and airlines will not be allowed to spend any grant money on stock buybacks or CEO bonus pay for the life of the grant plus 1 year. Democrats also secured tough new requirements on federal grants and loans to any industry. No stock buybacks for the length of any loan provided by the Treasury plus 1 additional year. Restrictions on any increases to executive compensation. A requirement to protect collective bargaining agreements. Democrats secured a prohibition on any Trump Organization business or any business controlled by any other government leaders from receiving a loan from this bill. We compelled the creation of Treasury Department Special Inspector General to provide oversight of Treasury loans and investments, an accountability committee to protect taxpayer dollars, and a Congressional Oversight Commission as well. And there will be much-needed transparency in these requirements as well. The Treasury Secretary must, by law, make public, quickly, the names and terms of loans or other assistance to corporate borrowers. I believe it was Justice Brandeis said sunlight is the great disinfectant. If any of these loans look untoward, if any of these loans don't look right, if any of these loans shouldn't go to where they're going, the public, the Congress will know quickly, and that will put pressure on the Treasury Secretary not to do them and certainly not to repeat them. Fourth, resources of state, local, and tribal governments who are carrying the weight of their overburdened health networks on their budgets is there. This came down to the wire. Our Republican friends didn't want to do it, but I'm glad they acceded to our wishes here, because local governments are hurting. They are spending more money than they have ever spent, and at the same time their tax revenues have declined. And so we must help our local governments, and we will in this legislation. And it will be distributed between both the local government, the county governments, and the state. In the end, state and local governments will now get $150 billion, with $8 billion set aside for tribal governments. The relief is desperately needed, because state revenues have dried up almost overnight, leaving them with untenable choices about how to allocate their health care and other resources. Fifth, urgent help for small businesses. My dad was a small businessman, an exterminator. He used to pace the floor Sunday nights at 2 a.m. because he didn't want to go to work. I know how small business people worry and suffer under normal times, let alone these difficult times. This bill offers $350 billion in loan forgiveness grants to small businesses to keep their existing workforce and to help pay for things like rent, mortgage, and utilities. It provides $10 billion in emergency grants to provide immediate relief for small business operating costs. And of course, there are many things besides in this bill. Those were the 5 things we pushed for. Small business was much in the bill that Leader McConnell put forward. All the rest, we, as Democrats, have pushed hard for and gotten in the bill. Now, there are other things, too. Support for American families, including child care, education, senior care, housing, and more. One thing of particular importance to my state is public transit. The MTA is drowning after such a steep and sudden loss of ridership. Democrats asked for and now have secured $25 billion life preserver to keep those public transit systems afloat as well. And it's not just big cities. The bus systems in rural areas will depend on this as well. The bottom line is this. This bipartisan agreement will provide more resources to our public health system and protect American workers of all stripes. Now, as I've said before, this bill is far from perfect. Many flaws remain, some serious. But by no stretch of the imagination is this the bill the Democrats would have written had we been in the majority. If Democrats held the pen, we would have designed the assistance to troubled industries in a completely different way. We would have added even more support for Medicaid, hospitals, community health centers, and nursing homes, new patient protections to ensure that everyone with coronavirus can access and afford treatment. We would have increased food assistance. We would have included more relief for student borrowers and prohibitions on evictions and foreclosures on Americans for the duration of the crisis. We've gotten many of those, but not all, on evictions and foreclosures. We would have put workers first in every single part of the bill. That's what we tried to do here as much as possible, but Senate Democrats are not in the majority. We knew this bill had to pass muster with a Republican administration, and a failure to reach an agreement in this time of deepening, serious, painful national crisis was simply not an option. We have before us an imperfect bill, but a necessary one. Despite its flaws, it is far better than where we started, and it's time to pass it. Now, before I yield the floor, there are some people I have to recognize. The Republican chairs and Democratic ranking members and their staffs who have worked diligently on this legislation. Senators Leahy and Cardin and Shaheen and Warren and Reid and Peters and Wyden and so many more. I could name the whole caucus and their entire staffs. Thank you. This bill is better because of your long hours and hard work. The floor staff who kept this chamber open and running at all hours, we thank you. Secretary Minuchin, Eric Uland, Mark Meadows, and their staffs, who have spent more time in my office than they care to admit. Thank you. Now to my staff. I am blessed with the greatest staff a senator could have. They are so dedicated to the public good. They are so dedicated to this country, and you should have seen them working. Jerry Petrella, Megan Tyra had a little baby at home. Both of them have important roles in my staff. They met here, they got married, they're still here. They were day in, day out, but so was everybody else. So was everybody else. I want to thank my staff. And if the American people saw the work you did, they'd be so proud. So, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Our colleagues and our staffs have committed themselves in this way because they understand the sacrifices being made by the American people in homes, in hospitals, across this great nation. The working families who are at home, missing paychecks, playing teacher and provider and caregiver all at once. The thousands of Americans who are volunteering to help understaffed medical facilities. The small business owners who are watching the labor of their lives evaporate in an instant, but are still paying their workers as much as they can manage. The nurses and doctors and healthcare workers who know better than anyone the risk of contracting this disease by treating infected patients, but go to work every day, working longer shifts to do God's work anyway. To them, to all Americans, I say this: help is on the way. Big help, quick help. We are going to take up this bill and pass it to care for those who are now caring for us and help carry millions of Americans through these dark times. This is certainly not the end of our work here in Congress, but rather the end of the beginning. The crisis continues to deepen. There will be difficult days ahead, and the worst may be yet to come, and we certainly may have to come back and do further legislation. But we know right now help is on the way, and we will not stop working till we see our nation through this time of extraordinary challenge. I yield the floor and note the absent. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is great to be back on the floor of the U.S. Senate. It's a heavy obligation that we have before us. On March 17th, I was contacted by the Tri-County Health Department to notify me that on March 11th, I had been in a meeting with a Coloradan who later tested positive for COVID-19, and at the advice of the Tri-County Health Department and the attending physician in the Capitol, I entered self-quarantine to protect my colleagues, our community, and our family, and that time has now expired as of this morning. I certainly regret the fact that I missed a vote that passed 90-8 to complete Phase 2 of our help to address COVID-19. I wish I had been here because the vote would have been 91-8. But throughout that time that I was in quarantine, I had an opportunity to visit with thousands and thousands of Coloradans, telephone town halls in every congressional district, to hear from business leaders, to hear from individuals who have lost their job, to hear from business owners who are terrified about what happens next, to hear from parents who are at home with their kids who are out of school, not knowing if they go back at all to school, how to figure out how Zoom works, how to figure out how Skype works, how to figure out how technology works to teach their kids at home. Throughout this process, I've adopted a three-prong approach to what we must do as a country to get through the crisis at hand. Number one, we have to address the immediate health epidemic. What we are doing to, as the experts say, flatten the curve to stop the spread, to provide the resources, the tests, the protective equipment that we need to our states to make sure that they can fight this invisible virus. What we can be doing to give them the tools, the skills they need for the heroic efforts of our frontline healthcare providers, the doctors, the nurses, the clerical staff, the janitors, the classified workers, all of the people who have been so heroic to provide health care to our people. That's Phase 1, making sure that we stop this epidemic and address the needs of the American people. Prong 2 of this three-prong approach is about making sure that we provide individuals with immediate assistance, people who are terrified about what happens to their job, how they're going to make ends meet, what they're going to do to put food on the table, how they're going to pay their rent, how they're going to pay their mortgage. Will they have a restaurant to go back to? That's prong 2 of this approach. Prong 3, of course, is to get our businesses up and running again, to make sure that when this health epidemic is over, this health emergency is over, we can make sure we have an economy that snaps back and runs strong. And we will do that because we as a country will rise together. We will do it united. We will do it because we in this country know how to overcome great challenges. And we're taking these measures to quarantine and self-isolate not because we're fearful of the virus, not because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't, but we're doing it out of love for each other. We're doing it out of love for our neighbors and our community and our parents and our grandparents and our children. We take the guidances of the health experts and the public policy experts seriously because we want to share that love with people to stop the spread so that we can avoid the surge that could overwhelm our healthcare systems. Because we know under the best case scenarios, we're looking at a situation that could utilize 95% of every hospital bed in this country for the next year. We do this out of love for each other and for our community and to protect one another. In Colorado right now, we have roughly 1,000 plus confirmed COVID-19 patients. We've lost 12, perhaps more, by the time I'm giving this speech today in Colorado. These lives, those who've tested positive, their loved ones are all in my prayers today. The governor of Colorado obviously issuing emergency declarations. I just spoke with the governor a few minutes ago to talk about how we can continue to provide the resources that Colorado needs. Over 2 million people across the Denver metro area are now in some kind of a shelter-in-place ordered to stay at home. Our nation is uneasy, our future is uncertain, and the level of anxiety that our country faces is the highest I've ever seen it. But we don't need to have uneasiness about our future, because we will rise together. We will come together as a nation to overcome this. We know that the future of this nation will be prosperous again, that our economy will be thriving again, that our communities will be able to celebrate what we have overcome, because that's what we do in this great nation. We rise together, we stand together. Coloradans have stepped up in every way possible. In a uniquely Colorado way, you have hemp businesses that are now producing cotton swabs for medical needs. You have whiskey distilleries that are producing hand sanitizers for hospitals, for home health care. We have protective equipment that's being donated by the Denver Broncos and by marijuana industry and by so many other businesses across the state of Colorado who are stepping up in ways that make all of us proud. They're checking on their neighbors. They're checking on their friends. They're making sure that elderly people in their church that they've met are okay. Making sure that we check in with our loved ones and those around us. We've been able to get successful tests up and running in different places across Colorado, helping different organizations and different healthcare facilities find new ways to process this overwhelming burden. And as this place has passed phase 1 that gave millions of dollars to the state of Colorado and so many states around the country, as we've passed phase 2, which prepared additional testing and nutrition programs and other ways to meet this challenge, we now turn to phase 3. Phase 3 addresses all 3 prongs of my approach. It addresses the health emergency, it addresses assistance to individuals, and it addresses the ability of our economy and businesses to snap back when we address this health emergency. It needs to pass now. It should have passed days ago. I don't think the American people give a hoot whether this idea was a Republican idea or whether this idea was a Democrat idea. I can tell you on my teletown halls that I've did and my conversations I've had with American people around the state of Colorado, they haven't once said to me, well, we hope the Republican-only version passes, or we hope the Democrat-only version passes. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, do your doggone job because we're scared about what happens next. Pass the relief that we need to get them back on their feet, to make sure they know they're going to be able to have food on the table, to pay rent. I can't imagine what somebody who built for 50 years as a small business must be going through every hour we delay, wondering if that 50-year dream is going to stand and survive. Shame on the people around here who said, you know what, let's have one more day of delay, one more hour of delay. Because a Republican could get their way, or a Democrat could get their way. When I was at home, not once did I hear anybody say, could you stall a little bit more for partisan purposes? The American people are rising above the fray. They are meeting this challenge in the spirit that I hear in every conversation I have. They're donating blood. They're sharing that love that I talked about with their neighbors, their communities. They're figuring out new ways to be together even when we're supposed to stand apart. That's what the American people are doing. And we're bickering about phase 3, and we'll have phase 4 and phase 5, but you know what we've done? Instead of patting ourselves on the back, you know what we've done? We've managed to get back, I hope, to the starting line. We didn't run through the tape. We haven't finished the job. We've made it, I hope, to a place where we can now know we're back at the line and we can run together to fix what will be tremendous needs and to address tremendous needs of this country, to answer the anxiety that every single one of our constituents has. That's what Congress should do. That's what Congress must do. And I am glad and I'll be proud to vote for this bill today, because we have to get this job done and there's more work to do. We have to make sure that people understand that the recovery benefits that they're going to be receiving will help answer that anxiety, to hopefully give them hope. That the new categories of unemployment insurance that have been created under this will also give them the ability to know it's going to be okay. To know that the small business loans that are being made available will help that restaurant stay in business. You know, I talked to Eve and Aurora, and she didn't know how she was going to survive because, yeah, she had converted her whole business to takeout, but she didn't know how successful that would be. To Roberta in Pueblo, who had the same questions about how her restaurant was going to survive. This small business loan will be able to help people pay payroll, to bring those back onto payroll that they may have let go because they didn't know how they're going to make ends meet, to pay them, to pay their utilities, to pay their rent, to pay their mortgages, and to have that loan forgiven, to keep this economy in a place where it will be vibrant again. Because that's what we do in this country. We don't look back, we look forward. And in Colorado, we look up to that great Rocky Mountain horizon, and we don't look down, we look up and we see the next horizon. And we strive for that optimistic next day. That's what we do in Colorado. And I know this country does the same. You know, I talked to a 70-year-old Coloradan in Weld County, Colorado, who on a teletown hall, you could hear it in her voice. She didn't know what she was supposed to do because she was older than the experts say should be out and not following guidances. But she said, I can't find the disinfectants and the cleaners that I need. How do I find that? So we were able to find her relief. And the grocery stores have stepped up, and they've provided special hours for people. And they're delivering to people like the woman that I spoke to. They're providing information to their communities, and they've got clerks. They've got cashiers. They've got people stocking the shelves who are on the front lines of this fight as well, keeping our communities safe. So to all of them, thank you for the work that they are doing each and every day. It's important to recognize in this country that we've seen great challenges. I remember my grandmother who passed away this past year talking about her experiences in the Great Depression. This country's been through the Great Depression. We've been through the Great Recession. We will make it through the Great Infection. That's what we do as a country. That's who we are as a people. The Senate will approve this bill today, and the House must approve it without delay. No excuses. No delay. Pass the doggone bill now. The American people have expected this for a long time. Shouldn't have taken this long. Do your job. Do our job. Get this done. We will act out of love for our communities. We will act out of compassion. And we will rise to the spirit that has made this country great. I've heard so many of my colleagues come together and talk about a wartime footing, or they've talked about how we've mobilized in a way that maybe people have never seen in their lifetimes. It's reminded me, though, of what Thomas Paine wrote in The Crisis during our revolution, which actually George Washington read to his troops. And here is what Thomas Paine said. I call not upon a few, but upon all, not on this state or that state, but on every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel, better here to have too much force than too little, when so great an object is at stake. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and repulse it. We were taught in Sunday school that our struggles lead to perseverance. That perseverance leads to character. And that character gives us hope. We will get through this, America. We will start with this bill. We've got a lot more work to do. But to my colleagues, do our jobs. Get it done. No excuses. I yield the floor, Mr. President, and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
The senator from Maryland is recognized.
I would ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, the people in this nation are hurting. We know that. They are very concerned about their own health. They're worried that they may be carrying the virus and they take it home to their elderly parent who could be come down with the virus. They are worried about how long this social distancing and commuting from home and staying at home is going to be required in order to control the spread of the virus. They're worried about their economic circumstances, whether they're going to get a paycheck. And I am pleased that today we have an agreement with our leaders to move forward on the third stimulus package to deal with this crisis of COVID-19. I first want to express my appreciation to our leadership. I have been in daily, almost hourly communication with Senator Schumer, and I know how hard he's worked to make sure this package really reaches the medical emergency that we have, that deals with the workers to make sure that they are protected and they are protected in whatever we do, that provides the help for state and local governments, that provides the much needed attention to these particular issues, and that we have accountability on any of the monies that are going particularly to our largest companies in this country. So I want to express my appreciation, and I am very pleased that our very first priority, is to deal with the public health challenge. This is including what's happening in my state of Maryland and what's happening in every state in our nation. So I am pleased that in our state, it's Team Maryland. Our congressional delegation is working very closely with Governor Hogan and his cabinet, and we're working very closely with our county executives and our mayors and our private sector to do everything we can to protect the public health of the people of our state. We've done what we can locally to make sure testing is available so we understand the dimensions of this problem, and the governor has taken extraordinary steps in order to increase our medical capacity in the likelihood that we're going to see a significantly increased number of those people that have the coronavirus. Yes, we need to stay at home unless it is an urgent reason for us to be outside of home. And I'm frequently asked by my friends, why don't we do as much as we can in the United States Senate remotely? I think we should, including voting. So we need to distance ourselves and minimize social contact in order to prevent the spike of this disease, which would test our medical capacity to handle it. So I was pleased that the third supplemental, the agreement that's been reached that we will vote on hopefully today, that it does have a surge in our medical capacity, a Marshall Plan to deal with our health care needs. I could go through a lot of the specifics. I think some have already been gone through, but I particularly appreciate the fact that we have $100 billion for our hospitals and health care facilities, including clinics in this bill. I am pleased that there is a 20% increase in hospital reimbursement rates, and I want to thank Senator Grassley and Senator Wyden for including in that provision a unique clause for the Maryland hospitals so that they can be qualified for this. Maryland has, as I think some of you know, an all-payer rate structure, and we had to make sure that these provisions would apply in Maryland, and I thank them for their attention to that detail. There's also money in here for our hospitals to be ready for preparedness, which I think is extremely important. And there is a separate line appropriation for our community health centers and our federally qualified health clinics. That's critically important. They're being stressed as the needs are increasing and as the cost of treatment is increasing. We need to replenish the national stockpile. We know the concerns on protective gear. We know that. We know that ventilators and respirators are in short supply. We got to make sure that we have adequate replacement of what has been taken out of our national stockpile and available now to deal with the surge that is coming under any scenario, so that our healthcare workers have the protective gear that they need and our patients have the medical facilities and the respirators that they need. We also have plussed up the work being done to deal with the development of a vaccine. I'm pleased that NIH is getting the monies that they need in order to do the work. We know that we're not going to have a vaccine in time this year, but we want to make sure that we get it as soon as possible, and it's on a fast track, and these funds will help us develop that vaccine for the future needs of controlling this type of a virus. But in the meantime, we're also putting resources into therapeutic drugs that can help people that are sick today. Those drugs are not yet available, but we want to make sure we do everything we can to make them available as soon as possible. FEMA has been bumped up substantially in this bill for good reason, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And that brings me to the point that is a major improvement that's been brought in this legislation to help our state and local governments. They're the front lines of providing these public health needs, and we need to provide them the resources they need. So FEMA needs to be properly appropriated, and we have the money in here to help FEMA, but we also need direct help to our local governments to deal with this problem. And we see that our state and local public health officers are getting extra money, better reporting, so we know exactly what the status is in each of our communities. All that's important for our Marshall Plan to control this disease and get it under control. But I wanted to take this time to talk about a matter that I was working on small business, and I mentioned that, recognizing we got to get our economy back on track. The best way to get our economy back on track? Get this virus controlled. Get people able to get out, to work, and to buy and participate in our economy. That's the best thing we can do. But this package also recognizes that unless we help businesses and workers today, we're not going to be prepared for our economy when we're able to rebound. So my role as the senior Democrat on the Small Business Committee, working with Senator Rubio, the chairman of that committee, was to make sure we had a robust provision to preserve the growth engine and innovation engine of our economy, and that is small businesses. There's more job growth for small companies. There's more innovation in small companies. We need to preserve the ability of small companies to get through this time. And quite frankly, they don't have the same deep pockets that large companies have. They don't have the same availability of credit that large companies have. They don't have the same banking arrangements that large companies have. They don't have the same flexibility that large companies have. So we have to provide special attention to small businesses, and this package does that in a very, very robust way. So first, I already mentioned Senator Rubio. I thank him for his leadership. The two of us were working together well before this week. And that's why we were probably further along on helping small businesses than the other parts of this package dealing with the various economic areas. Senator Shaheen was a valuable member of our team. I've worked with Senator Shaheen on small business issues for a long time. She was a key player in putting together the package that we have to present to our colleagues here in the United States Senate. I also want to acknowledge Senator Collins. It was the four of us that were meeting regularly, communicating regularly, that recommend this package that you'll be shortly voting on as it relates to small business. So I also, if I could, I'd like to acknowledge members of my own staff that have worked literally 24/7. I've talked to them at the various times during the night and day, and it's been very stressful for all of us, but our staffs get no rest whatsoever. So to Sean Moore and the entire staff on the Democratic side of the Small Business Committee, thank you on behalf of America's small businesses and workers and on behalf of our country. And to Ron Storhoff, who's been doing a lot of these provisions on my staff in regards to the tax issues, in regards to a lot of these other issues. Thank him for all of his work. And to Lauren G., who's our health person, who has not only helped us put together this small business package, but she's been available to help Maryland health providers and patients to try to get through where we are today. All that's reflected in the bill that we will be voting on later. And I know on the Republican side, there's been dedicated staff who've done equal work to make sure that we have a bill that we can present today. So let me go over, if I might, some of the provisions that we have in here for small businesses. We have three new programs to help small businesses in our community. They'll have different titles, but every one of them provide grant help to small businesses. I want to repeat that. You might hear this as a loan. No, these are going to be funds that go to small businesses that do not have to be repaid. These are grant money. Why? Because a small business owner can't incur more debt today when they have no idea how they're going to be able to survive in the future. We've got to provide immediate help. It's got to be substantial, and it's got to be in a way that they know that they're not encumbering their future. And that's what we do. We want to get that message out, that this is going to be immediate help to help America's small business. One program provides $350 billion of relief to small companies under 500 employees. $350 billion. It is triggered by going to your financial institution and getting what's known as a 7A loan. But let me caution you, it's going to be forgiven if you follow the rules here. But you go to a bank, they are a financial institution, you do a 7A loan, it's 100% guaranteed by the federal government, so the bank has no risk factor here. There are no payments due for a year, so even getting into this loan, there is no obligations for cash outlays on behalf of the borrower. The fees have been waived. So this is a cost-free opportunity to get the cash you need to keep your small business open. That's the purpose of this new program under the Small Business Administration. The amount of the loan. You take your average payroll before the coronavirus was here, and you take your monthly average payroll and multiply it by 2.5. Basically, what you're getting is 2 months of payroll for your workers, plus an extra, it comes out to an extra 25% of your payroll because it's 2 months of that. Now, what eligible expenses, what can you use this for? Well, you can use the 2 months of payroll for payroll. Pay your workers, keep them employed. It saves you the cost of rehiring if you had to furlough or lay off workers. You can keep them employed. You can use the extra funds to cover their expenses that you have on their health care or related expenses. You can use the extra 25% for rents or mortgage payments or utility bills. So it gives you a cash to conduct your business for the next 2 months. It gives you the ability to keep afloat so that you're ready to rebound when the economy rebounds. So who's eligible? As I said, companies under 500, but we went beyond the traditional 7A eligibilities. For the first time under 7As, we're also allowing nonprofits to be able to get into this program so that they will also be able to stay afloat, because we know the important work that nonprofits do for our community. They are also eligible. And we gave some relaxation to the 500 rule for locations that were for restaurants or hotels that have multiple locations. This is a program that's aimed at keeping businesses open and ready, small businesses, for when we get through this coronavirus. And then this amount of money that you borrowed is totally forgiven. Totally forgiven if you maintain your workforce to the pre-coronavirus level or bring back your workforce to the pre-coronavirus level during the stated period of time of this bill. So if you keep your workforce or bring back your workforce, the government's going to help you maintain your ability and make sure your workers get paid and their benefits are maintained. It works very well with the other provisions that are in other parts of this bill, such as the unemployment insurance benefits. Yes, if you furlough workers, you can collect unemployment benefits at basically full salary for the next 4 months. So that's also available to small businesses. But we want you to also know that you can keep your employees employed. They're ready for the business to rebound, as we hope it will shortly. So that's just one program. We have other programs available. We have a new program, which is labeled as a grant, a $10 billion grant program for emergency cash availability for small businesses. There are many small businesses that have a hard time going to a bank and getting a commercial loan. There are many small businesses that need cash today. They can't wait for that process to work its way through to get that check from the Small Business Administration through one of their financial institutions. It's going to take a little bit longer for them to be able to get that done. So we have emergency disaster relief loans. In the first supplemental, we made it clear that small businesses qualify for emergency disaster relief loans if they've been adversely impacted by the coronavirus. These are direct loans coming out of the Small Business Administration. These are not loans that are from financial institutions. We have included that in the first supplemental. We now allow you to make that application, and with that application, if you need to get cash immediately, the SBA can write you a check for up to $10,000. And we want that done within 3 days. We want that money out in days, not weeks. We hear that all the time from small businesses. We need help now. Well, this program, and I was pleased to work on this program. I filed legislation on it. This is a need that's out there today and will be available to small business owners. Now, we have a third program. That's two programs. You can get this basically 2-month help from the federal government to pay your payroll and related expenses. You can get a $10,000 immediate cash advancement on that through applying for a disaster relief loan and showing a need at this stage. And then there's a third program. There are many small businesses today that have existing loans under the Small Business Administration. These are 7A loans or 504 loans. 7A is the traditional loan. 504 are the larger loans. What this bill does is provide $17 billion of relief. So those who have these existing loans do not need to make any payments on those loans. They're forgiven for the next 6 months. I particularly want to acknowledge Senator Coons' work on this. This is a bill that we've been working on, and it's only reasonable to relieve. We're asking others to relieve debt. Let us do it for our small businesses under the 7A and 504 programs. So as you see, Madam President, there's a lot of provisions here that help our small businesses. I want to tell you that there are other, in addition to those three I just mentioned. I'm pleased that we do have contract protection in this bill, and let me explain what that means. If you're a business and have a contract with the federal government, this applies to all businesses, not just small businesses, but small businesses are particularly impacted by it. But you can't perform that government contract because you can't get access to the facility because it's shuttered as a result of the coronavirus. This bill allows you, the federal government, to make sure you have adequate funds available to pay your workers so that those individuals who should have been working at the federal facility will get paid during this period of time. We've also provided money for the women business centers and the minority business development centers that are there in our community. Why? Because we got to get the message out to small businesses about these new tools, how they can access banks to get these 7A loans that are forgiven, that are actually grants, how they can apply to the Small Business Administration for disaster relief loans and get a cash advancement, how they can get relief from their current 7A and 504 loans. So we give money to these institutions so that these entrepreneur service groups so they can help women businesses and minority businesses get access. And I must tell you, Madam President, we've also put a clear intent that we expect that financial institutions to make loans to all size small businesses in all communities so that all communities can benefit from this legislation. We've increased the size of express loans under this, and I just want to compliment the work of other working groups, particularly on the tax provisions. I was very pleased to work with Senator Wyden. The two of us worked on what's known as a retention credit, which allows companies that have furloughed workers to bring those workers back and get a credit up to 50% of that wage, up to $10,000 as a tax credit in order to bring back those workers. Well, for some small businesses, that may be a better option than what I've outlined before in regards to the 2.5 months of aid based upon payroll. You have a choice. If you can do better under retention credit, it's a new credit, use that credit. If not, use the other. Small businesses are given more flexibility. Thank you, Senator Wyden, for helping us. I'm also going to acknowledge Senator Warner, who was very instrumental in getting that provision adopted. So, Madam President, you see there is a whole range of tools in here to keep small businesses operating, paying their workers so they don't have to reinvent their employees after this crisis is over, that they can keep qualified people employed, they get the paychecks, and our economy is ready to get back into shape. Now, there are many other provisions in this bill, including the cash payments under the IRS, $1,200 per taxpayer, that will help in this regard. When you put this all together, this is a robust package to bring our economy, to hold our economy so that it can perform at a level that it's ready to take off again without the dire consequences of people not having income in order to pay their bills. Through these small business provisions, small business owners can keep their businesses intact. Through unemployment insurance, those that are laid off or furloughed can get their salaries. Through the IRS checks, people will have some cash. Through some of these other programs, we are providing relief, like delaying the time of paying the employer's share of the FICA taxes. You put that all together, there is a lot of help out here to keep our economy going during this crisis, with particular focus on the workers and on small business. Last point I should point out, the self-employed, the gig economy are fully covered under the small business provisions. They're fully covered under the UI provisions. We are trying to make sure that we preserve our economy, that we preserve workers and their families and their abilities to pay their bills. And I think when you take a look at this whole package, the challenge will be to get the information out to our constituents, to these businesses, to these workers, so they know what's in this package so that they can act now. Because quite frankly, people are desperate, companies are desperate. When malls are closed, as they are in Maryland, and you're operating a small business in that mall, have no business at all, you don't know how you're going to make your next payroll. You've got to make decisions today. That's why it's important that we vote on this bill today, we get it to the president as soon as possible, get the information out to the small businesses and to the workers and to all businesses, that we are here to help keep them open, to keep the paychecks flowing, to keep our economy moving, that we're in this together. We're going to get through this period of time. Our economy is going to come back. But we want you to know to take advantage of these tools so that we can minimize the adverse impact of the coronavirus. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Oklahoma is recognized.
This morning, Technical Sergeant Marshall Roberts of Oklahoma came home. It was a dignified transfer in Tulsa, Oklahoma early this morning. There were a lot of people that wanted to be there, but because of COVID-19 could not. But a lot of other folks were. Tech Sergeant Marshall Roberts was killed in Iraq Wednesday, March the 11th, when his unit was engaged by indirect enemy fire while they were sleeping. He was 17 miles north of Baghdad. He's deployed with the 219th Engineering Installation Squadron, a subordinate unit of the 138th, out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was in the process of building communications infrastructure as part of the fight against ISIS. The operation that Roberts served in, Operation Inherent Resolve, has been a vital part of protecting our nation and bringing stability to the region. Roberts enlisted in the Oklahoma Air National Guard in May of 2014. He was killed in action as the first Oklahoma Air National Guardsman who has died, but the 20th Oklahoma National Guardsman who has died since September the 11th of 2001. The perpetual comment that I heard from the folks that I talked to about Tech Sergeant Roberts was he was one of the good guys. He was always known for having a smile on his face, was selfless, he served others all the way to the end. The night of the attack, there's a truck launcher that fired off 30 Katyusha rockets at their camp as folks were sleeping. 18 of those rockets landed inside the camp facility. As the noise happened around him, Sergeant Roberts told his fellow airmen to get up, get going, get their body armor on. And as he stepped away to go warn other people to do the same, the rocket came. But some of the people standing right there that he had told them to get their body armor on, he saved their life. He was posthumously promoted. He was posthumously promoted to technical sergeant. He was born January the 29th, 1992 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Marshall's parents, Sally and Randy, raised him in Owasso, Oklahoma, where he graduated from Owasso High School. His beautiful daughter, Peyton, who's been the love of his life. November the 15th, 2018, Marshall was married to Chrissy Harris. She was also in the 138th, and they met and started dating as both being a part of the National Guard there, the Air National Guard. Their deep love for God, their deep love for their country, and their obvious love for each other was a significant part of the 138th. Everyone knew them, knew what they were like, and were glad to be called their friends. He was a brother, he was a son, he was a father, he was a husband, and our state and our nation grieves him today coming home. Fun story about he and Chrissy, though. They met and started dating, as I mentioned, while they were both serving with the 138th. She had been in the 138th for 15 years, so she had actually been there longer. They dated 4 years before they got married in 2018. They've been married just less than 2 years. They were both avid football fans, but there was a major problem. Chrissy is a Kansas Chiefs fan, and Marshall's a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And that's a problem, definitely. But he fixed that by proposing to Chrissy at the Steelers-Chiefs game. I have to tell you, for the family, for the folks that stood there today in Tulsa as he came home, they found a way to be able to love on each other. They found a way to be able to serve each other. And to the very end, they're still sacrificing for the country. Because the COVID-19 that's happening right now, they've chosen not to have a public memorial service and a close time for the family. And they're delaying that time till it's safer for all of the family and for all the community to be able to participate. Literally, their family continues the grief and the wait. One more sacrifice for their country and for their community. Today, all of Oklahoma is using a hashtag to just share messages with the family. A simple hashtag, hashtag TSGT Marshall Roberts. That's hashtag Technical Sergeant Marshall Roberts, if you want to know all the abbreviations on it, to be able to share a message of support and love for the family. Our nation is grateful, and we grieve with you for the loss today. Thank you to him and to his family for wearing the cloth of our country and for doing everything that our nation asked of him to the very end. Our nation lives in freedom because of folks like Marshall Roberts, and we will continue to stand with Chrissy and Peyton and with their family. With that, I yield. Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, we're in the process of passing a very large economic package to help stabilize our economy through the middle of all that's happening with COVID-19 globally and in the United States. The heart of the package we're passing today is almost identical to what we brought actually Sunday night, which was a bipartisan proposal, which ranking members and chairmen of all the major committees had worked together to be able to get this done. The key elements of it are still there. It's unemployment insurance for Americans, including a $600 plus up to be able to go through the process. There is support for small businesses that'll actually pay the payroll. We don't want individuals to end up on unemployment insurance. It's better if they stay connected to their same company. So it has a unique new proposal that's built in to be able to say a small business can go to any bank rapidly to be able to get a loan there, which will convert into a grant if they maintain their current employee numbers. That keeps people connected to their business and keeps people assured of a job at the end of all this when it all finishes out. It is a grant program for larger businesses that's designed to say if you're a very large company, you're not going to get a grant, you're going to get a loan at this process. And at that moment you get a loan, if you don't have capital and you don't have access to it right now because of all that's going on, you could get that. This also has a feature built in where individuals will receive just a check for $1,200. Every adult does. That is built in to be able to give immediate economic support to all of those folks across the country. Now, all those features were already in the bill, already through Sunday night. Now, there have been some tweaks that some folks have brought up that some of our Democratic colleagues really wanted to be able to engage in, and many of those changes have been heard and been added, and some we have said, absolutely not, it's not connected to COVID-19 at all. But there's some things that some of our Democratic colleagues really wanted to make sure they got in, and through all the negotiations, some of these things were changed. For instance, they really wanted to make sure that energy companies couldn't get any support. So they fought hard to be able to make sure there is no additional money for the president buying additional oil to put in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at this lowest price now. So it will actually cost us more money in the future. But it was their intention to say we don't want oil companies to get any kind of support in this downturn. They also wanted to make sure that there was great transparency because they didn't trust the Trump administration, so they built in an inspector general and a whole bunch of additional people to be able to watch the Treasury through the process. And they put in a neat little feature that they demanded, and that was that no son or daughter or family member or any individual that works with the presidency, vice presidency, or in the Congress could get any of, not the grant programs, the loan programs. In fact, it was interesting the language they demanded. No son-in-law could get that. I wonder who that could be targeted towards. A particular son-in-law that might be there. Literally, a lot of this fight that we've had over the last 3 days is because they were demanding that there was no way that the president or any of his family could get any kind of loan or benefit from this program at all. So we spent 3 days of delay because they had some additional demands for some things they wanted to do, significantly targeted a lot at the president and his family. I understand they don't like the president. I get that. We want to do everything we can to be able to protect the workers. That's why we had all these programs in place already and why we had done a lot of bipartisan work to be able to get it done. It's done now. Let's get it going. And our encouragement is to be able to have the House be able to finish this up as quickly as possible and to be able to get the support to the American people. What has been interesting, though, is in the speeches that I've heard on the floor today from my colleagues and from many individuals and releases that I've seen, is folks have mentioned their prayer. They have mentioned with God's help we're going to get through this. They have mentioned the struggle that we're going through as a nation and how we're praying for each other. And it keeps reminding me of something. It's a very old Psalm of Ascent. Psalm 121. When the Jews would come into Jerusalem for the different feasts, they would sing these Psalms of Ascent as they came off the eastern hills and would start rising up towards Jerusalem. And the psalm they would sing, I think, is pertinent for our time right now. Psalm 121 reads, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from?" Now remember, the mountains here is the capital city, Jerusalem. It's the seat of government for them and the center of worship. But it's the seat of government for them. And they would sing, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from harm. He will watch over you. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forevermore." It's interesting to me that the people would come in, marching into Jerusalem, the seat of government, singing the song, "I lift up my eyes to the mountain. But where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord." And of all the things that are going on in Washington, D.C. right now, you'll hear people here repeating over and over again, our hope is not in government. Our hope is not in how much money we can spend. We understand full well, when we lift up our eyes to the mountain, to this hill, we understand full well where our help comes from. And it's not from all the folks in this room. Our help comes from the Lord, and we're grateful that he neither slumbers nor sleeps. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arkansas.
the deadly coronavirus that emerged from China late last year has now spread across the globe. The Chinese Communist Party deceived the world, even their own people, and unleashed the worst pandemic in a century on us all. Now it falls to us to defeat it. Here at home, a strange and unsettling hush has fallen over much of the country as businesses close and millions of Americans brace for what's to come. In New York, Seattle, New Orleans, and elsewhere, preparation for the virus has ended. The virus has arrived in force. The urgent battle to suppress it has begun. In emergency rooms and ICUs, courageous doctors and nurses are already locked in a battle to save the lives of their patients. Protective gear is in short supply, but their regard for safety and even family comes second to their duty. The days ahead will be a close-run thing in those cities as they struggle to keep their hospitals open and functioning. But make no mistake, the China virus will spare none of us, from the high rises of the big cities to the hills of the Ozarks. Soon, the Senate will finally pass desperately needed emergency legislation for our nation, including a massive infusion of funds to our healthcare system. But this legislation isn't about stimulus. It's about survival. With this legislation behind us, Americans are beginning to ask, what's next? Yes, the virus is testing us already, and it has already touched most of us by closing our churches, shuttering our businesses, and threatening the jobs and retirement savings of millions of Americans, and of course, threatening our lives. It's only natural that so many are wondering anxiously when and how this unprecedented crisis will end. And when it ends, will their jobs still be there? How will they put food on the table? How will they pay the bills? Americans want to know the plan so they can do their part. More fundamentally, they want to know that there is a plan. Upended routines combined with worry about the future naturally breeds frustration. We are citizens, after all, not merely passive carriers of a deadly pathogen. This frustration has given rise to a new and growing argument that Americans can't wait any longer, that we ought to open back up and take our chances with this virus. After all, we can't stay inside forever. We can't, as the saying goes, let the cure be worse than the disease. The urgency to stave off economic collapse is, of course, understandable. And it's tempting to think that we face a simple choice between shutting down to fight the virus and opening up to save the economy. But the choice is not so simple. Some thoughtful observers note that the seasonal flu and automobile accidents kill more Americans annually than has this virus. That's true, as far as it goes. But we're just at the beginning of this pandemic. And I have to add, the Javits Center in New York City has never been converted into a field hospital for the flu and car wrecks. Granting that, some say, perhaps we can reopen in a few days, since our elderly are most at risk from this virus. Quarantine them, keep them safe, the argument goes, while the rest of us get back to work. But there are 72 million Americans over the age of 60 in this country. Many of them raise children, live alone, or work outside the home. They can't wall themselves off from the world, nor should we wall them in. Moreover, tens of millions of younger Americans have pre-existing conditions that put them at elevated risk from this virus. Are we to quarantine all of them too? Because even younger and healthier Americans are not safe from this pandemic. The China virus attacks the lungs of the young and the old alike. Of the cases we know about, the virus appears to send about 1 in 7 younger people to the hospital. It's true that survival rates for younger patients are better, but even their recovery depends on a functioning healthcare system. If we give up on our efforts to control this virus now, our medical system will be overwhelmed. Hospitals will collapse. Care will be rationed. Doctors will face the terrible choice of whom to save and whom to let perish. And not just for patients of this virus, for every American who needs intensive care, whether from heart attack or stroke or car wreck or anything else. Besides, if left unchecked, this deadly virus will continue to wreck our economy as surely as it has already. It wasn't President Trump who shut down businesses after all. And it really wasn't even governors and mayors, though they issued the orders. Government-enforced closures were largely a rearguard action by communities that had already ground to a halt due to the virus, or that soon would have come to a wrenching stop in the teeth of the pandemic. Who among us would take our kids to a restaurant tomorrow if we open back up? Our economy isn't seized up because of government dictates, but rather because our people are understandably fearful of a dangerous virus. So an immediate reopening without the resources in place to fight the virus isn't an option. Our hospitals would be overwhelmed. Our brave doctors and nurses would succumb to the illness. Our businesses would keep their doors closed or would quickly close their doors again as workers and customers stayed away. The supposed choice between saving the economy and fighting the virus turns out not to be much of a choice at all. We can't yet stop the strong measures that are in place because we have no better option in the short run. But neither can we continue them forever. The American people can only hold out for so long. So we must come up with a better plan, and fast. That plan starts with this big pause as we protect ourselves and each other. We simply don't have the resources today to fight any other way. But it won't end with this approach. We must use the precious days and weeks ahead to lay the groundwork for a new strategy to fight the virus, a strategy that will allow all of us to gradually get back to work. For that to happen, we'll need to scale up our ability to rapidly test for the virus, as they have in South Korea, so we have a sense of where the virus is and where we must keep it contained. Already, America's public laboratories and companies are rising to the challenge, processing tens of thousands of tests. But our ability to test must grow even faster, and it is. We'll need masks too, billions of them. And we'll need local personnel trained and prepared to do widespread contact tracing for those who test positive. We'll have to develop procedures for strict quarantines of those who test positive or those who've been exposed to the virus, with zero tolerance for breaking quarantine and endangering our fellow citizens. Once these elements are in place and the first wave of this virus is passed, then we'll be prepared to reopen our cities and communities while remaining vigilant about new outbreaks. These preparations will ensure we're ready to sustain our way of life until our scientists can create what we so desperately need: therapeutic drugs and, ultimately, a vaccine. A vaccine may take a year or more before it's available, but these other intermediate precautions must go into effect much, much faster. America must indeed reopen. When we do, these decisions must be based on local conditions, not an arbitrary nationwide timeline. Our governors and mayors understand their local conditions. They can make gradual, rolling, calibrated decisions in a way that is responsible when the tools to effectively fight this virus are ready and available. What I've outlined may seem like a daunting, even an impossible challenge, but our nation has overcome far greater challenges before. Already, America is rising to take on the China virus. The giant of American industry is awakening, retooling our factories to join this fight, just as we did during World War II. Never bet against America's workers and American ingenuity. And all across this country, Americans are springing into action. We know the vital role our doctors and nurses will play in the coming months, alongside our first responders, our factory workers and farmers, our grocers, and on down the list. Ask yourself now, how can you help? Can you keep your distance from those most at risk, realizing that the China virus preys on our most earnest desires for society and companionship? Can you offer your charity to a friend in need? Can you pick up groceries for your elderly neighbor? Can you keep your workers on payroll and benefits just a little longer till our legislation kicks in? Can you postpone your tenant's rent for a month? Can you pray for deliverance of our nation and the world? These are just a few of the things we must do as a country to make reopening possible and life bearable in the months ahead. We're all in this together, so we'll need to have each other's best interests at heart. Many years of comfort and ease have perhaps conditioned us to ask only what we're free to do, not what we're called to do. But the old disciplines of peril and privation threaten to return. We'll need old notions of duty to maintain order in the face of them. The darkest days of this crisis are, in all likelihood, still ahead of us. Let us face up to them bravely. Let us acknowledge the troubles ahead, and let us devote our whole energy to winning this battle quickly so that the normal life of our nation can resume. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Texas. Mr. President, during times of disaster, crisis, or hardship, I never fail to be inspired by the generosity of Americans, including folks in my home state of Texas. I think about how we came together in the wake of Hurricane Harvey to lead search and rescue operations, clear debris, and rebuild communities and lives. We saw strangers forming human chains to rescue a driver trapped in a car, restaurants offering free meals to first responders, and a Houston legend known affectionately as Mattress Mac opening his furniture stores for those in need of shelter. One volunteer said, "I've met more of my neighbors in the last 24 hours than I have in the last 20 years. Well, these heartwarming stories of Texans lending a hand to one another are a source of comfort, even during the toughest times. Right now, when extending a physical hand is one of the worst things you can do because it violates social distancing rules, there's still plenty of neighbors helping their neighbors. Folks in Texas, like around the country, are staying home to keep themselves and their neighbors safe. And we're seeing new and creative means of supporting one another. For example, a number of distilleries across the state have switched their production from vodka or whiskey to make hand sanitizer. With demand surging and hand sanitizer in short supply, more and more hospitals are struggling to keep it in stock, and these distilleries are stepping up to fill the void. Jonathan Lackerich is the head distiller and co-founder of the En Route Republic Distillery in Denison, Texas, and said they got a call from Texoma Medical Center asking if they could help. Of course, he said yes. But businesses like this aren't alone. Beloved Texas grocery chain, H-E-B, has taken steps to make shopping easier for seniors who are at most risk if they contract the coronavirus. H-E-B partnered with Favor Delivery to take grocery delivery, a service many Americans already utilize, and make it more accessible to seniors. They can pick up the phone, place an order, and have everything they need delivered to their front door within a few hours, all without having to leave home. We've also seen other organizations working to adapt to these challenging circumstances. The Boys and Girls Club of Greater Houston partnered with the Houston Food Bank to open a drive-through pantry. Families can get a whole week's worth of healthy meals without ever stepping out of the car. Of course, it's not just businesses and organizations who are helping out. People are helping other people. People are donating blood to alleviate the critical shortage that hospitals are facing. And all of us should consider, if we can, donating blood. They're leaving notes in neighbors' mailboxes offering to run errands and pick up supplies. On social media, school teachers that are at home are offering to help parents with their math, science, or other subjects that they may be struggling to teach their kids while they're at home and not at school. Neighbors helping neighbors, friends helping strangers, Texans helping Texans. That's one thing I love about this great country. Our communities always jump into action to help any way they can. They do what it takes to survive a crisis and keep one another safe and healthy until we emerge on the other side. Mr. President, it's time for the Senate to do its part. There's been no event in my lifetime that has had this big an impact on the physical and economic health of our country. Every day we learn about more new cases, rising unemployment, and unprecedented market volatility. We have a responsibility to act and to act quickly in response to this dueling crisis. Already, we were able to work and send 2 bills to the President's desk for signature. The first sent vital support to healthcare professionals and first responders who are doing everything they can to treat patients and prepare for more cases. We also provided initial funding for development of a vaccine, clinical trials, and more diagnostic tests. The second bill we passed focused more on the small businesses and the individual workers who are impacted economically. It included changes in unemployment insurance so that those who find themselves out of a job can promptly take advantage of these benefits, and made paid sick and family leave available for workers impacted by the virus. That's what we did in these first 2 bills. Were they perfect? Well, no. The second bill in particular fell short in a number of areas. It was largely negotiated by Secretary of the Treasury Minuchin and Speaker Pelosi. But we decided that in the interest of the greater good and the country and the people who were hurting during this crisis, that we in the Senate would pass it expeditiously. As the saying goes, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We acted quickly to get both bills to the President's desk because the circumstances demanded it. Sadly, over the last few days, our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been oblivious to the sense of urgency that every other American seems to understand. After the original intense bipartisan negotiations, we were finalizing a third relief bill, which included, by definition, ideas from both Republicans and Democrats. We were optimistic that we'd be able to take up and pass the bill on Sunday, or at least get it started and pass the bill on Monday, but clearly that didn't happen. Our Democratic colleagues blocked us from even debating the bill, not once, but twice. The minority leader said the bill, which his members had helped write, wasn't good enough. He spent the next 3 days trying to change the bill to include provisions that he thought were more important priorities during a national emergency. Things like tax credits for solar panels and tighter emission standards for airlines, proposals that have absolutely nothing to do with this crisis. After a few incredulous days, America woke up to the news today that our Democratic colleagues are finally ready to stop this posturing and this obstruction and to get this job done. After blocking this bill twice and holding up this emergency lifeline, here's what the minority leader claims is a victory. He says the Democrats expanded unemployment insurance to help laid-off workers and those who are self-employed. But, Mr. President, as we all know, that was already part of the bill that had been negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. Then the minority leader said Americans will get direct aid, but we've been talking about that for weeks. That was part of the bill that Democrats blocked twice. And let's be clear about this. Here we are, members of the United States Congress, getting a paycheck, and they have the temerity to block 2 times emergency aid to people who have no income at all through no fault of their own. It's outrageous. Then the minority leader said he secured unprecedented aid for America's hospitals, but as it turns out, that was part of the bill Democrats have blocked twice. It was the subject of bipartisan negotiations, and we thought a consensus. Well, the bill that Democrats blocked twice was a bipartisan bill to begin with. Democrats and Republicans worked together and agreed to each of these points before the first votes were cast. The minority leader's members had spent countless hours negotiating with Republicans. That's how you get things done. But then he single-handedly tries to take credit for the work that they have done. For days, Democrats needlessly blocked a bill that would have bolstered our fight to defeat this virus and protected our economy in the process. I am absolutely angry that they chose to waste so much valuable time when there are so many different people in need. But I'm also relieved that they finally agreed to quit playing their partisan games so we can vote on this legislation today. This bill sends desperately needed funding to hospitals that are struggling to manage an influx of patients and helps fight the shortage of masks and other personal protective equipment, one of the priorities my governor had mentioned to me. It provides the direct financial assistance that was already in the 2 bills that our Democratic colleagues blocked. A family of 4 will receive up to $3,400 under this legislation, which will go a long way to throwing that lifeline to them and cover their rent, groceries, electric bills, and other expenses until they can make other arrangements, like apply for unemployment insurance under our beefed-up provisions. This legislation will also provide relief for small businesses that are struggling to stay afloat. Many of these businesses have had to shut down because they've been ordered by the government to do so. And now they need some help to make sure that the jobs they currently provide will still be available when we get to the other side of this crisis. And particularly, we need to make sure that the employees they depend on and will depend on in the future will still be there when they reopen their doors. With both the physical and economic health of our country in crisis, this bold legislation is our best path forward. I appreciate the work that's been done by so many around the clock for the better part of the past week to get this bill finally to the floor. And I look forward to supporting it so that my constituents, the 29 million people that call Texas home, will get help as soon as possible. As we prepare to pass this legislation and send it to the House, I urge them to act quickly. But you may recall, Mr. President, it was Speaker Pelosi who flew back into town after a week-long recess, dropped an 1,100-page bill, and made all these outrageous new demands, clearing out their partisan or ideological outbox or wish list. Well, incredibly, now that there has been an agreement here in the Senate with the administration, Speaker Pelosi hasn't even called the House back into session. Matter of fact, they gavelled in session and out of session today, and they won't be back in session until tomorrow. Speaker Pelosi has a huge challenge. Unless she can get unanimous consent to pass a $2 trillion bill through the House, she may well have to call back into session the entire House of Representatives. With restricted flights because of the lack of demand and the cost cutting that airlines are going through, with the concerns about people sheltering in place, maintaining social distance and good hygiene to stop the spread of this virus, Speaker Pelosi has created a terrible problem for herself. But more importantly, she's created even more of a problem for the rest of the country, because we need to get this passed out of the Senate today and out of the House into the President as soon as possible. The American people are depending on us to respond responsibly in a bipartisan way during an emergency like this, and we cannot let them down.